Alright, hello again. In this tutorial I'd like to cover something that's recently popped up in the discussion forums on Yahoo groups, and that is how to create fireworks or fireballs or maybe an incoming meteor that's breaking apart. Anything basically that the particle brushes should be able to handle. And I see something here that's not very impressive in terms of the visual realism for smoke trails, but that's not the intent. What I'm trying to do is just see some of the parameters that we will need to use and how to accommodate them to create what you want to do there. You know, some sort of a firework or a big ball of fire flying through the air and gravity pulling them down. But they're also changing colors and getting dimmer towards the end. So you see the particles, maybe if we slow them down, keep an eye for instance on this one here. You see it initially pretty bright, it's right there, and as it's moving across it's changing color. It's kind of a greenish tint now, and that's because it's going along this gradient. So the particles have that capability to change colors along the gradient. You can click here to see the gradient. You can also use the slider to change what gradient colors they go through. And so you could use that as a starting point. For instance, you could say this one here, and perhaps find it right there. There you go. However, it's starting dark and going bright, right? It's not very dark to begin with, but we certainly probably need the inverse of that. So one thing you'll need to do in the gradient sweep editor is to switch left to right. So that's reversing the gradient when you click on that. And now you see that it's going from bright white to the darker reddish color. Now, it's one thing to go to red, but you also have the opacity that you can use to make it actually fade and lose its impact. So over time it gets less and less of that brightness. And so you could choose any of these tabs here to set, for instance, the value to go darker. But regardless of that, one thing you can also do is have the opacity get lower and lower. So in the end, it's just not doing any, it's not drawing that particle anymore. It's really fading away. So that's one thing I would try. And let's go do that. Let's go erase the whole animation. You simply right click on the X button here, the red X, and say clear all frames. Make sure that your color is black if you want to see that against dark background. No, if it isn't, if you have it like this, you simply click this little double arrow here, the switcheroo, or you can do that right over here too. You can click and drag the black color, the primary color, into the secondary, and the two will switch and trade places. All right, so now you got the right click here to clear all frames, and that will clear all frames of the animation. And let's see what happens now if I'm drawing a path like this. Okay, now that one's pretty strong. Let's undo. That path is good, but I may not want to have that much initial velocity. They're going a little bit too fast. So let's say 5 initially, and they're going to accelerate and go faster and longer there. All right, so let's undo that. You see that they start bright and they gradually turn reddish and eventually fade to dark. All right, so let's undo that, and now select the stroke player, and we'll do this twice in this little tutorial. I've already set it up here, and we'll just start from scratch one more time after this initial review. So stroke player is here in the animation menu, and then we can go and select play it on the current frame. Just replay it once there to see what that does. Sure enough, it goes there. And then you undo that, or just erase it, and now you select the all frames mode and replay it there. Okay, now the particles have moved from frame to frame, and you can see them evolve like that. All right, and what you can do is re-render that one more time, you know, again and again. Actually, you can replay it on top of that if it's not dense enough at first. So there is a lot of playing there to get to a decent result, but you can see here already it's fading. It's pretty opaque, and then it gradually gets darker and fades away. All right, so let's go from scratch. Actually, at the very beginning, one thing you might want to do is switch to the website. And on our website, if you click on products, where you have the overview of all the different versions from many years ago as well, you'll see towards the left here there's a navigation bar, a vertical navigation bar, and under the downloads, and you can probably see that right here as well, by the way. If you go simply to downloads, you should be able to see something like brushes, freebies, brushes, brush images, and so on. That would be a good place to look. There may be other places, but I'll go here to freebies and free particles and free brushes. And so there is a set of free animator brushes And these are custom brushes like animation brushes, but these ones here are the ones we're looking for now, the fractal particle brushes, right? This is the particle brush system, and there is actually an example of a firework right there. And as we scroll down, we'll see some examples of other things you can do with the particle brushes, like these pine trees, or these pine trees with a little bit of a wintry blend or frosted look to it. And as you keep going down, there's a few more, and there's one called fireworks.opt. So that's an optipustic file setting for firework-like effects. And so if nothing else, what you could do is click on that, and of course that will just reveal the, if you open it like in Notepad or something, it will just show the text file, the parameters. But what you could do is simply save that to your dog waffle installation folder. So you'll want to go and identify that file and place it in the location where your dog waffle is installed, where your particles are. Depending on which version you have, and this is a fairly old list, we actually are now at version 8.1. But when you go to install that copy of the OPT file into where all the other OPT files are, you can then go to the optipustic settings. And so now I'm going to start from scratch and basically get rid of everything and see how we start and do all that, right? So we'll go and initially have a new image, and we will set it, let's say for instance 640 by 480, and we'll create an animation sequence of let's say 66 frames. There, 66 frames, and there we are. So we have the animation bar here, and we can scrub through that. We can also give ourselves a little bit more room here. This vertical bar allows us to go around like that. So I'm using version 8, actually 8.1 Howler edition with the animation features. And first thing I'll want to do is make sure you're on the on the paintbrush tool, and you see the settings, and then over here the particles. So I'm going to click the particles, and in the particle tabs there's a couple of different types of particles, the newest foliage as well. Rules-based foliage system, but we're going to stick with the first original optipustics or particle system, and enable that, and we'll look for a preset. So load here, and click on load, and you should see the fireworks. I don't have it here because I didn't copy it in here yet, but you saw how to get that from the website and put it into your installation folder. Incidentally, the installation folder will vary from installation to installation because we don't know where you installed it. So if you choose the default installation folder, it's probably going to be something like program files, maybe in the x86 flavor of the subtree. If you are on a Windows 7 or Vista, a 64-bit version of that OS. And then you should have something like maybe PD Pro or Project Dog Waffle Professional. If you have version 4 or version 5, I think we'll install it there too. By default, you might have Howler if you're on version 7 or 8, maybe 6 also. I don't remember all these different folders, but what you will want to do is simply find the folder where you have your dog waffle installation, and usually it will be about 200 or 300 files there, quite a number of files. And one thing you can do is also find the subfolders, and one of them probably will be here, unless you have a really old version of dog waffle, and the OPT files may actually be mixed and mingled all along the executables themselves. Kind of messy, so we've organized that in a little bit more organized way here. We've structured it, and you should have a folder called particles, and if you open that, you'll see a number of different files. Some of them are OPT files. These are the optipustics files. So that's the original particle brush system that we will be using. There are also FOL for foliage. Those are foliage files for the different new rules-based foliage system. But in here is essentially where you'll want to make sure that you have your presets downloaded and saved into that folder. So for instance, if I have my download folder here in which I saved the fireworks optipustic file here, I can simply drag and drop it in here, move it into the particle folder, or you could copy paste it, or there's many different ways. You could save it directly there from your download in your web browser, whatever way you use. Essentially, in the end, you will want to make sure that your OPT file is right in there. Now, as you go back to dog waffle at that point, This list will not be updated automatically until you relaunch this. You may need to relaunch the program also. So let's see if that does it. If you click particles and click on load, we should have it under fireworks here somewhere. We don't see it. So I probably need to restart Dog Waffle so that it goes through that list in the folder again, right? The initial lookup for all the different files that are in there. So let's go do that and we'll be right back. And so here we are. Let's go back and initialize this with the size we wanted initially, 640 by 480, and make sure it is black on the erase color. There you go, and go create this animation. What did we say? 66 frames, and there we go. So now the particles, let's see here. Let's enable the particles. By default they look a little bit simple here. Let's give it some, let's go and see if the preset for fireworks is there now. There it is, sure enough. So fireworks, okay. So now that's the one we downloaded from our website, right? That preset, and there's a bunch of others there that you can use. This one may be the one we'll use in the end, maybe not. Okay, we'll just experiment with that a little bit. One thing you see is that the colors are changing. It goes from a reddish color to kind of a green, then cyan, light, and then blue. Now we may want to change that, so click on this color range. The sweep editor will open at that point. And one thing we'll do is first of all we'll switch it. We'll start with a brighter blue here. We'll set the value a little bit higher, so it kind of goes white, and perhaps something like that. All right. Then we'll also set the opacity initially fully opaque, but then we go and fade away. All right. And then we also want to do something with the color so that the red is a little bit darker towards the end. Something like so. No green. So it really gets this reddish look a little bit faster. Let's get the green out actually really fast. There you go. So we have a color range now that will be somewhat like this. And what else can we do to change the appearance of that? This doesn't look too much like fireworks right now here. So one thing we'll do is maybe we'll start with shrinking lines. Shrinking lines, we can change the size, so they are bigger initially. That may already look a little bit bigger. Now this is not very long particle traces, but you can imagine, you can see here something like maybe a rocket crashing back or coming in and releasing a lot of smoke trails. One thing we could do here is actually have it a little bit brighter as well, or darker, so change the gain here, right? And then one thing we might want to do is make them longer. So the particles need to live a little bit longer before they fade away, and that's done with the lifespan here. So look at that parameter here, the lifespan, and give it maybe 66. And there you go. So now they already are flying a little bit longer, right, and leaving those trails much longer. So that might actually be a fairly decent start. Let's go and try that and see. Yeah, so we'll do something like that. Let's go give it a quick particle trail like so. There you go. Undo that. I'm using U for undo, or this one here. And now I can go to the animation stroke player and render that as a replay of the entire stroke. You can do a first test into just the current frame here. So that's the default, the current frame. It will go into frame 0 that we have selected right here. And replay that, and you can see how it's rendering into that. Okay, so undo that, and now switch to all frames and replay into all frames. Now it looks funky at first during the rendering, but what it's actually doing is fairly usable and decent here in the particle evolution. There you see that, right? So you can scrub through that, and that's already an initial firework that might be kind of the incoming meteor. But if it's not dense enough, if you need more particles, one thing you can do is re-render that. You can render that again, and maybe just the same parameters, or maybe a little bit different. You could, for instance, change the opacity here, or the step distance, or the size of the particles if you want a few of them a little bit smaller. Now this size, or these parameters, may not be taken into consideration unless you change the style, because essentially if you have the shrinking lines, it controls it right there. That's just the initial size, and that's it. So you could do that. But if you wanted a little bit more control from other brush parameters, what you do is you tag this one here to make sure we don't lose it, and then you go to the settings of the particles, of the regular brushes, that is. Click that. So we have these available here too. And these particle brush, these non-particle brushes, these regular brush parameters, they will be taken into consideration if you actually tell the system to use not the built-in line or nova or shrinking lines, but the brush setting. So when you use this, you say, hey, go look at the regular brush and draw that along the particle traces. Right. There is also the nova here. Let's do that one quickly, by the way. We could also do that. Now that one sometimes will saturate a little bit too fast, so it may take a while to render that. But that's a good one to give kind of a fluffy smoke trail there. So look at that. See, we just rendered that in addition there on top of the original. So that would be a good way to give it a little bit of a glitter there. And you do that perhaps again 2 or 3 times, and it gets more dense. And after a while, you get a nice little smoke trail there from a firework or rocket engine or whatnot. But there is a couple of other ways that we want to explore, and that is by setting the style to the brush. So that means now we're using a regular brush, right? So let's say, for instance, I use the default, which is the airbrush. Large airbrush is the default, and that looks like this, right? So I'm going to undo that. Excuse me, undo that once. Actually, I'm going to totally restart from the beginning. So right click and clear frames. There you go. And I'm going to draw my brush going like that. Right, so it's going to go along that path, or maybe it's an incoming meteor. Let's do it a little bit different, like so, right? And at this point, I want to turn that into particles emitting along from that path, right? So I'm going to simply enable the particles right there, because when I chose the large airbrush, that disabled the particle system. It's either one or the other. But now I enable it, and when I have it enabled, I still keep the style to the brush, which means it's actually calling on the parameters from the regular brush, from my airbrush. It's using that to actually render the particles. So this size parameter is no longer active. This one here is now. This size parameter, that's the size of the brush, and the particle brush is set to use that brush, so I can actually control the size right here. Okay, for instance, if I do a test like this, it's a relatively large default airbrush style, right? But if I make it, let's say if I make it smaller, you see much thinner, right? And then something in between. There you go. So you have quick and easy control of the size, but it's not changing the size. The other style here, the shrinking lines, they're actually changing size over time. Whereas this one here, they keep that same size. Now you could change the size with speed or with tablet pressure and so on, but it's not a time-based direct mapping of the size. One thing you do have though also is the opacity. You can change the opacity of that, so it's more of a ghosty image there. Look at that. That looks a little bit more like a smoke trail now. Let's see what else could we do. The step distance, right? Make it a little bit denser or less dense. Make it a little bit more sparse. All right. And then one thing you also notice is that sometimes it breaks up and then comes back, and that's because of the math behind how many particles can be seen before it reaches the saturation. And then once they're all there, depending on how long they live, there may be a point where a bunch of them are still rendered but very faintly and you don't see them, and then suddenly it starts coming in with a new generation of particles. So sometimes you need to increase or decrease this maximum number of particles to bridge the gap here, if you see that. Or you change how many particles are being emitted at the same time. So one thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to see if I can find a fairly decent combination here that I can use. Let's see if we have split angles. I'm not going to split the particles. Let's try to not do any randomization at first, so it's pretty much predictable and doesn't give us too many surprises as to where they go. Gravity is pretty strong right now. Let's give it a little bit less. Let's give gravity 0.1, so it looks less like particles that are falling. They still fall towards the end, right? They still come down. There you see they curve and they eventually go down. But the colors of this we definitely need to see if we can set the opacity a little bit darker here, and then also have the opacity here perhaps a little bit thinner. There you go. Alright, you know, this is where you experiment and you play with it a little bit, and you eventually find what it is you're looking for. So there's a lot of parameters to try here. And so I'm going to go with this, and there you go. And then I'm going to undo that and replay it through the stroke player right there. Oh, I have it there already. And I'm going to replay it into all frames, not in Hancock mode. Hancock mode does something else. It leaves like footprints that are staying there, and you don't want that. You want it to fade away. So it's really the best way to do this is either a subset of the whole animation by selecting a range, or all frames, and then it will replay over the entire frame sequence. Right, and so here I have just one pass, and that's very thin. So I'm going to do another one, replay again, and replay again, and just do that a few times. You know, and maybe if you need to, you can also have a few bigger ones, and then you can have even smaller ones that are at a higher opacity, so you get to see little particles that are spiking away. See, and there you go. So that gives you an idea of how to start doing something like that. It's not just one brush stroke. I mean, I did have one brush stroke, but I re-render it a few times because I want to have a variety of different effects combined on top of it here. It might be perhaps also a brush that does some smearing. Maybe I need to add that. So, you know, switch to one of the effects brushes here, like this one here, and do a smear or a smudge. Try some of these, right? Let's do the smear, and then make sure it's still enabled, and render that again. Replay on that, and that will hopefully add a little bit of smearing effect, which you know is kind of expected when you see something like smoke trails, right? You might see that the wind tear it apart and the smoke blur away. This might get a little bit too intense here in this one here. Maybe I went too far. So, you know, every once in a while you want to save what you have and make sure you can go back to it, and then you know, perhaps also switch to the other styles again. Keep an eye on these. Experiment with these. There's the Nova style, very useful too for bright shiny lights, and that one actually takes care of much of the smoke trails as well. So definitely one I would try here. We now have a nice combination of some turbulent looking smearing behind it and nice flickering bright shiny lights. And then, you know, if this is the only thing that's in this animation and you didn't have some image behind it to begin with, one thing you can also do is to add some more smearing at the whole animation level. Like you can go to, where is it, right here, the timeline, and you can add something like a ghosting. You can add a ghosting effect there, and perhaps quite a bit of it, and add that. So if you have too much, and that one, by the way, is funny. It's an algorithm that renders backwards, but so that's why it looked like it was flying backwards. But essentially, it renders a little bit of a ghosting effect. So if you have parts that seem to be moving too fast, you can see now that it's kind of doing a smoke trail or a visual trail behind it as well. Alright, so hopefully that gets you started on the right foot here, and gives you some idea on how to create some animated particles, fireworks, all sorts of different scenarios where you might need that. And thanks for watching, and happy waffling and howling.